Today we're talking about the basic structure of cells so that we can describe how they function, and our success criteria is being able to define parts of a cell as being organelles and being able to describe the cell membrane. The structure of a cell gets compared to a lot of different things. You can do a sports team, you could do a movie crew. A very common one is comparing it to a city or to a country, or even to the human body itself, just in miniature. Each part of the cell has a specific function. Some parts of the cell remove waste, others build things, some produce energy. So those different parts have to be able to interact with each other as well as act independently, efficiently on their own, and being able to interact with the outside environment. And one of the big contradictions of biology, these individual parts, which we call organelles, are not alive. But together, when they work together, they make a living cell. And cells come in a variety of shapes and sizes. Here we have cells from inside the human nose, we see onion cells, we see bacterial cells. You'll notice these are all different sizes. The scale at the bottom is in micrometers and nanometers. Some cells are much bigger than other cells. Plants and animals and bacteria and protozoa and fungi all have different types of tissue. They all have different types of specialized cells, and they all have their own unique adaptations that other types of life don't have. Something they all do have in common, however, is what we call a cell membrane, and it's far from the only thing. The general structure of a cell, there is much more in common than there is different. It's just the differences are important. But all cells have what we call a cell membrane. The cell membrane is a boundary that separates the cell from its external environment. So when you look at the surface of each of those individual cells, you are mostly looking at the cell membrane. Now, an important thing that we'll talk about later is plants and fungi also have something called a cell wall outside of their cell membrane. That's the big thick thing in between each of these onion cells. But there's also a cell membrane on the inside of that. So they still do have this membrane. And the cell membrane is a special structure that is semi-permeable. What that means, semi means kind of, and permeable means passes through. So it will let some things pass through, but keep other things out. So a good example is often water. It will allow water to pass in and out as it needs to, but not everything can. And actually water goes at a fairly slow rate as well. All cell membranes have this really unique and really interesting structure chemically. They're made out of chemicals called phospholipids. Phospholipid looks like this. If you want to see the entire formula, that's what's up at top. But basically a phospholipid can be described as a head and two tails. And the way they arrange themselves is so that there's actually two layers, hence it's a bilayer, because bi means two, and all of the tails are pointing towards the inside. And that's a neat trick because what it does is it creates a layer that's very difficult for stuff to get through. It has to be a small chemical and it'll go slowly. And the reason for that is that the head, the circle in the diagram, attracts water, but the tails repel water, literally like oil and water. So it can be difficult for stuff to pass through. So this bilayer creates a really chemically unique structure that can allow some things to get through, but not many. If there's any type of charge, or polarization, it becomes very difficult for things to get through. We often say that water is actually more corrosive than any acid on the planet. But the thing about water is it's not corrosive to this phospholipid bilayer. So we don't think of water as being a very good thing for dissolving stuff, even though chemists recognize it is. Well, that's because this particular bilayer doesn't dissolve in it very easily. And that's one of the key things in keeping the cell alive. You're creating a barrier that means that there's a definite outside and a definite inside, which means all of the other organelles can control the inside to keep the cell living.